There is something about 2 in the morning and a glass of something amber that feels like the only honest place in the world. Not because it is honest, but because everything else has finally gone quiet enough that you can almost hear yourself think. The house is still. The notifications have stopped. The version of you that smiles and performs and holds everything together has finally clocked out. And in that silence, with the soft burn of something moving down your throat, you feel, for the first time all day, like you can breathe that moment. You know that moment. Maybe it is not whiskey for you. Maybe it is wine at the end of a long Tuesday. Maybe it is a beer that turns into 4 before you realize it. Maybe it is the ritual of it, the uncorking, the pouring, the first sip, that matters more than the drink itself. There is something in that ritual that says, the day is done, you survived it, and now there is this small, reliable mercy waiting for you. But somewhere underneath that relief, if you sit with it long enough, if you let yourself go past the warmth and into the quiet, there is something else, something older, something that does not taste like the drink at all. This is not a story about addiction in the clinical sense. This is a story about why. Why some people can leave the bottle on the counter and walk away without thinking twice. And why, for others, that bottle carries something that has nothing to do with alcohol at all. Think about who you were at 7 or 8 or 10 years old. Think about what the inside of your house felt like, not what it looked like. Not whether there was food in the refrigerator or whether the lawn was mowed. Think about what it felt like to walk through the front door. Was there a tension you could sense before anyone even spoke? A certain way your parents set down a glass or came home with that particular look on their face that made your whole body shift into a different gear? Did you learn very early to read rooms the way other children read picture books? You became fluent in a language no child should have to learn. The language of mood, the language of when to disappear and when to make yourself small and when to be so perfectly good that nothing bad would happen. You learned to watch, to monitor, to manage, not because anyone sat you down and taught you these things, but because you had to, because the cost of not knowing was too high. Maybe the home was loud. Maybe someone drank or raged or disappeared into themselves for days at a time. Maybe there was no single dramatic event, but instead a chronic, low-grade emotional weather that never quite lifted. The cloud that just stayed. The tension that had no name. You adapted. That is what children do. You took whatever chaos or coldness or unpredictability surrounded you, and you found ways to survive it. You were creative and resilient in ways that nobody praised, because nobody even noticed. You just quietly became whoever you needed to be, and now you are an adult. And sometimes you pour a drink, and it feels, just for a moment, like coming home. There is a concept in psychology called the window of tolerance. The idea is simple once you understand it through the body. Imagine your nervous system has a range, a kind of bandwidth, within which you can think clearly, feel safely, respond without falling apart. When you are inside that window, you are present, you are regulated, you can handle things. But when something pushes you outside that window, when the stress is too much, when the emotion is too big, when the moment demands something your nervous system cannot deliver, you go one of two places. You either go up into anxiety, hypervigilance, the racing heart and the tight chest and the mind that will not stop spinning, or you go down into numbness, shutdown, disconnection, the feeling of watching your own life from somewhere slightly outside yourself. Children who grow up in unpredictable, frightening, or emotionally chaotic homes often have a window of tolerance that never fully develops because nobody helped them build it. When a child is overwhelmed, they need a regulated adult to co-regulate with them, to say through presence and calm and warmth, "This is manageable, you are safe, I am here." That is how children learn to handle big feelings, not through instruction, through nervous systems and conversation. But if the adults in your home were themselves dysregulated, if they were the source of the overwhelm rather than the shelter from it, you had no one to co-regulate with. You were alone inside feelings that were too large for your small body to contain. And you coped the way you could. You split off. You shut down. You performed. You dissociated in ways so subtle nobody would have called it that. This is what developmental trauma looks like. Not always a single catastrophic event. Sometimes just the steady accumulation of moments where you needed something and it was not there. And so the nervous system learns a different map. It learns that safety is unreliable, that connection is unpredictable, that the only person you can truly depend on is yourself. Except you have not even learned how to depend on yourself yet, because you are 7 years old, and you are still trying to figure out how to make it to dinner without something going wrong. Here is where it gets more complex. Here is the part that might not be obvious at first. When you grow up in an environment that is emotionally unsafe, you do not just learn to distrust the world. You learn to distrust yourself. Specifically, you learn to distrust your own emotional experience. Because expressing emotion, needing things, asking for comfort, being visibly upset, those things may have been met with dismissal or anger, or the kind of silence that felt worse than anger. So you learn to mute yourself. You learn that your feelings were inconvenient, too much, not welcome. And here is the twist that most conversations about childhood trauma miss entirely. The feelings did not go away. They never go away. They went underground. They became the unnamed weight you carry into every room, the tightness in your shoulders before a difficult conversation, the way you interpret a slightly short text message as proof that someone is angry at you, the disproportionate grief that hits you sometimes in the most ordinary moments, washing the dishes, driving home, standing in a grocery store, and you cannot explain why. You just suddenly feel this enormous, sourceless sadness that you have no language for, because it belongs to a version of you that never had language for it. What saved you then imprisons you now. The emotional suppression that helped you survive a chaotic childhood becomes the barrier to intimacy as an adult. The hypervigilance that kept you safe in an unpredictable home becomes the anxiety that will not let you rest even when everything is fine. The self-sufficiency that protected you becomes the wall that keeps people at a distance, even when you desperately want them closer. Pause here for a moment. Just let that land. Because this is the part that matters. This is the part that changes how you look at yourself. Or maybe how you stop looking at yourself as broken and start to see something different. Alcohol works. That is the terrible, simple truth of it. In the short term, for someone whose nervous system is chronically dysregulated, alcohol works. It artificially lowers the activity of the stress response. It dampens the amygdala, the part of the brain that is constantly scanning for threat. It quiets the inner voice that has been running a loop of criticism and vigilance since childhood. It creates, chemically, something that feels startlingly like safety. For someone who has never felt truly safe, that feeling is not a luxury. It feels like oxygen. Research in trauma neuroscience is unambiguous on this point. People who experienced adverse childhood experiences, abuse, neglect, witnessing violence, living with a parent who struggled with addiction or mental illness, these people are significantly more likely to develop substance use disorders, not because of weak character, not because of poor choices in isolation, but because their brains and nervous systems developed under conditions that made them neurologically vulnerable to anything that offers relief from chronic internal stress. The number is not small. Studies suggest that adults who experience 4 or more categories of childhood adversity are 5 times more likely to develop alcohol dependence than those who experience none. 5 times. That is not a statistical footnote. That is an entire population of people drinking not because they enjoy it, but because somewhere in their nervous system, alcohol became the most reliable answer to a question nobody ever taught them how to ask. The question is, how do I tolerate being inside my own body? And so you drink. Not every night, maybe. Or maybe every night. Maybe just on hard days, and then the definition of a hard day quietly expands until most days qualify. Maybe it is the glass of wine at 5 o'clock that you look forward to in a way that has started to feel slightly uncomfortable when you examine it too closely. Maybe it is the way you do not feel like yourself until after the first drink. Maybe it is the way the version of you that appears after 2 drinks is warmer, looser, funnier, more like the person you wish you were naturally, and you grieve the fact that you cannot seem to access that person without chemistry. Sometimes the drink feels like the only thing that makes me real. Maybe you do not identify as an alcoholic. Maybe the word does not fit, or maybe it fits and you are not ready to say so out loud. Both are okay here. This is not a conversation about labels. This is a conversation about what is underneath. Because underneath the drink, there is almost always a feeling. And underneath the feeling, there is almost always a memory. Not necessarily a memory you can name or locate with any precision. Sometimes it is more like a bruise that lives somewhere in the body that does not have a story attached to it, that just responds to certain kinds of pressure in certain kinds of ways. The intimacy that feels threatening, the success that feels undeserved, the quiet moment that somehow makes you more anxious than the busy ones, the kindness from another person that you hold at arm's length because some old part of you knows that kindness can be taken away. This is called emotional dysregulation, rooted in attachment disruption. But you did not need that phrase to recognize the experience. You have been living inside it, and you have been managing it the only way you knew how. Here is the most honest thing that can be said in this entire conversation. You were not broken by your childhood. You were shaped by it. Your brain, your nervous system, your emotional architecture, they adapted to the environment you were given. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They kept you alive. They kept you moving. They developed workarounds and coping strategies and entire personality structures designed to help you function inside a world that was not always safe. That is not a flaw. That is the most human thing imaginable. But you are not a child anymore, and the environment has changed. And the strategies that were once survival are now sometimes the source of the suffering. The drink is not the enemy. The drink is the messenger. It is telling you something about what is still unresolved, still unnamed, still living in the body, like an old wound that never quite healed because it never quite had the chance to. You were not weak. You were young, and you did the best you could with what you had. So what now? Not in the sense of a program or a plan or a 12-step anything, but what now in the most interior, personal, private sense? What now in the conversation you have with yourself at 2 a.m. when the glass is in your hand and something underneath the warmth is asking a question you have been avoiding for a long time? The path forward is not about willpower. That framing has never served you. Willpower is a cognitive function, and trauma lives somewhere older and deeper than cognition. You cannot think your way out of a nervous system response. You cannot logic your way back to safety if your body does not feel safe. What you can do is begin, slowly and without pressure, to get curious. Curious about the moment before the reach for the glass. Not judgmental, not clinical, just gently curious. What was happening in the body right before? What was the feeling? Was it boredom, which is sometimes loneliness in disguise? Was it anxiety, which is sometimes grief that has nowhere to go? Was it the particular kind of restlessness that arrives when something important needs to be felt, but you are not yet ready to feel it? I noticed I was reaching for something before I even knew I was thirsty. This kind of attention is called somatic awareness, the practice of tracking sensation in the body before it becomes a behavior. It sounds small. It is not small. For someone who learned early to disconnect from the body's signals, to override them, to push through them, the act of pausing and asking, "What am I actually feeling right now?" is radical. It is the beginning of a different relationship with yourself. It is also the beginning of meeting the part of you that the drink has been trying to protect. Because here is what shadow work and inner child psychology have in common, beneath their different vocabularies. They both suggest that the parts of us we have hidden, silenced, medicated, or outrun, those parts are not trying to destroy us. They are trying to get our attention. They have been trying to get our attention for a very long time. They carry the old grief, the old rage, the old fear, the things that were too big to feel at 7 and that have been waiting with considerable patience for an adult to finally come back and acknowledge them. You are that adult now. And some part of you, the part that keeps reaching for the bottle at the end of the day, that part is not your enemy. It is the youngest version of you, still trying to manage, still trying to make the overwhelm stop, still doing the only thing it ever knew to do. What would it mean to speak to that part of yourself, not with shame, but with something softer? Not with the voice of someone who is tired of the pattern, but with the voice of someone who finally understands why it started. There are people who drink to celebrate, and the drink is easy for them, weightless, uncomplicated. They leave half a glass on the counter without thinking about it. They do not know why you are still thinking about yours after you have already finished it. They did not learn what you learned. They did not need what you needed. Their nervous systems were given a different kind of early life, not necessarily perfect, not without pain, but different in the particular way that matters here. They were met enough of the time when they reached out. They were soothed enough of the time when they were frightened. Their window of tolerance was built slowly, steadily, by the presence of someone who could help them hold their feelings without being destroyed by them. You were not given that, or not enough of it. And so you built something else. Something scrappy and resourceful and ultimately costly. You built a self that could manage without being helped. A self that did not need, or at least did not show need. A self that could get through the day and then dissolve the tension of getting through it in the only reliable way available. I spent so many years being fine. I don't always know what I am when I stop performing. That sentence lives in many people. It just does not often get said out loud. The question that tends to emerge when someone sits with all of this long enough is not, how do I stop drinking? It is something quieter than that, something more fundamental. How do I learn to feel safe inside my own life? That is the actual question, and it does not have a quick answer. It does not have a program. It has a direction, a slow turning towards something, a gradual, often uncomfortable, often tender process of learning that your feelings will not kill you. that the grief can be felt without becoming permanent, that the rage can be acknowledged without destroying everything, that the fear can be held without having to be medicated away. Some people find this through relationships that are steady and honest enough to provide a new kind of relational experience, one that begins to slowly rewrite the old nervous system story. Some find it in practices that bring them into the body rather than out of it. Movement, breath, the particular stillness of sitting with sensation rather than running from it. Some find it in creativity, in writing, in music, in making things, which is sometimes the only language that can reach the places words cannot. None of these are the only path. All of them require patience. All of them require the willingness to feel worse before feeling better, because the feelings that have been waiting underground are not always gentle when they finally surface, but they are yours. They belong to you. And carrying them consciously, even when it is hard, is different from carrying them unconsciously inside a body that reaches for relief without knowing why. Come back to that 2 a.m. image. The stillness, the glass, the first moment of quiet after a long day. You wanted peace. You wanted to stop performing. You wanted, maybe more than anything, to be somewhere that felt like it was just for you. No demands, no monitoring, no managing of other people's feelings. Just a moment of pure and uncomplicated relief. That wanting is not a character flaw. That wanting is entirely human. What is worth sitting with, not in judgment but in genuine curiosity, is whether the relief ever fully arrives, whether the glass delivers what it promised, whether the morning after feels like something was resolved, or whether there is, underneath the sleep, the same quiet weight that was there before, perhaps slightly heavier now, carrying not just the original pain, but the addition of whatever complicated feelings come with reaching for the bottle again. I keep looking for the bottom of something I can't name. Healing, in this context, is not the end of wanting peace. It is learning slowly that peace is sometimes accessible from the inside. Not always, not easily, not without help and time and a great deal of grace given to yourself, but accessible, not only in the chemistry of something poured into a glass. The child who learned to survive inside chaos deserves to know that the chaos is not permanent, that the nervous system, even one shaped by early pain, is capable of change, not because of willpower or discipline or any kind of forcing, but because of something slower and more honest, the accumulation of moments in which you choose, gently, to stay with yourself instead of leaving. There is no clean ending to this conversation. Trauma does not work that way. Healing does not work that way. The patterns formed in childhood are old and deep, and they do not dissolve in the time it takes to watch a video or read an article or even say out loud, I think this is about something that happened a long time ago. But knowing is something. Recognition is something. The moment when a pattern stops being invisible and starts having a name and a history and a logic, that moment changes something. Not everything, not overnight, but something. You did not choose your childhood. You did not choose the nervous system that formed inside it. You did not choose the particular shape of the coping that emerged from years of surviving conditions. No child should have to navigate alone. You are not to blame for any of it, but you are here now, in a life that, whatever its complexity, contains something your childhood did not always offer, the possibility of choice, not perfect freedom, not the absence of the old wiring, but a degree of agency that was not available to you when you were small and dependent and had to take the world as it was given to you. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. The drink will be there tomorrow. The question, the real question, the one worth sitting with slowly in whatever quiet you can find, will also be there. And maybe one night you will sit with the question instead of reaching for the answer. Not because you have conquered something, but because you are finally curious enough about what is underneath to let yourself, just for a moment, look. The glass catches light differently when you are no longer using it to disappear.